Welcome to Healing Conversations. I'm Keisha. If you've been listening from the beginning of this season, we've been talking about what it means to come home to yourself after spending years in survival mode. We've talked about the things that help us survive. We've talked about strength and what happens when being the strong one becomes part of how we measure our worth. And more recently, we've talked about what happens when you begin seeing old relationships, old experiences, and even old versions of yourself with new eyes. Today, I want to talk about something underneath all of that: self-trust. Because one of the things I didn't understand when I started this healing journey was just how much trust I had lost. Not only trust in other people, trust in myself, my judgment, my instincts, my feelings, my body, my ability to recognize when something wasn't right, and maybe most importantly, my belief that what I was experiencing deserved my attention. For a long time, I thought self-trust meant confidence, knowing exactly what you want, making decisions without hesitation, following your intuition and being right. But I don't think that's what self-trust actually is, because none of us are going to be right all the time. Sometimes we're going to misread a situation. Sometimes we're going to make a decision and later realize we would choose differently. Sometimes we're going to need more information. Sometimes we're going to have absolutely no idea what's happening. And I'm learning that self-trust isn't certainty. Self-trust is taking yourself seriously enough to respond. And unfortunately, I learned just how important that distinction was through my body. Last year, I learned that I had fibroids. They were causing extremely heavy bleeding, and over time, I started becoming exhausted. But when I say exhausted, I don't mean the kind of tired where you need a good night's sleep. I mean weak, deeply weak. There were moments when even chewing my food felt exhausting. My body was very clearly telling me that something wasn't right, and I fought it. I fought calling my doctor. I questioned whether what I was experiencing was serious enough to warrant a phone call. I had already gotten so accustomed to functioning through discomfort that instead of asking, "What's happening to me?" my instinct was almost always, "Can I keep going?" Eventually, I called. My doctor ordered blood work. And when the results came back, he called me and told me to go to the emergency room immediately. And I remember being confused. I actually asked him, "What am I supposed to tell them when I get there?" He had the lab results in front of him. He knew something was seriously wrong. And I still didn't fully understand why I belonged in an emergency room. But here's the part that tells me the most about where I was mentally at the time. Before I went to the ER, I walked my dogs. My doctor had just told me to go to the emergency room, and I thought, let me take care of the dogs first. I still questioned whether I really needed to go, and I almost didn't. Eventually, I went. And when I got there, I learned just how serious things had become. The hemorrhaging from the fibroids had caused my hemoglobin to drop dangerously low, and I needed a blood transfusion. And I learned that I had lost roughly half of my blood volume. Half. Even saying that now feels surreal, because my body had been giving me signals long before I got to the hospital. Extreme exhaustion, weakness, a body struggling to do basic things. And somehow I was still asking whether it was serious enough. I wish I could tell you that story as an example of how beautifully I trusted myself. It isn't. It's actually an example of how difficult trusting myself had become. My body wasn't whispering. It was screaming, and I was still negotiating. Maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I can push through. Maybe it isn't that serious. Maybe I don't need help. Even after a doctor called me and told me to go to the emergency room, there was still part of me asking, do I really need to go? And I've thought about that a lot because that response didn't exist in isolation. If you've listened to earlier episodes, you've already heard different versions of this pattern. I told you about carrying too many groceries because I didn't want to inconvenience the delivery driver. I told you about cooking Christmas dinner for more than 20 people while I had pneumonia because somehow canceling felt harder than pushing my body through it. And then here I was, so weak I could barely chew food, walking my dogs before going to the emergency room. Different situations, same underlying message. Take care of everything else first. Then, if there's anything else left, you can take care of yourself. And I don't want to live like that anymore. Later, I learned about a woman who had experienced a similar problem, and she died because she didn't get treatment. Hearing that changed the way I understood what happened to me, because suddenly I could see how close I had come to treating something that was potentially life-threatening like it was an inconvenience. And I want to be very clear about something. It wasn't because I didn't value my life. It wasn't because I wanted something bad to happen. It was because I had become very practiced at overriding myself, at minimizing discomfort, at pushing through, at waiting, at taking care of whatever needed to happen next. And that's why my definition of self-trust has changed. Self-trust doesn't require me to know I had dangerously low hemoglobin or red blood count. It didn't require me to know how much blood I had lost. It didn't require me to know that I needed a blood transfusion. I'm not a doctor. I didn't need to diagnose myself. I only needed to believe myself enough to say, something isn't right, and then seek the right support. That's an important distinction for me, because self-trust isn't, I always know the answer. Sometimes self-trust sounds like, I don't know what's happening, but I know enough to ask for help. And that might be one of the healthiest forms of self-trust there is. I've also realized that this doesn't apply only to physical health. How many times have we done this emotionally? Something feels wrong in a relationship, but we tell ourselves it's probably nothing. We're exhausted at work, but we say everybody's tired. We feel disconnected from our lives, but we think, I should be grateful. Someone says something that hurt us, and before we've even allowed ourselves to feel hurt, we're already explaining why they probably didn't mean it. Sometimes we become so skilled at providing context for everyone else's behavior that we completely contextualize ourselves out of our own experience. And I know that pattern intimately. There were times in my marriage when I would express a concern and somehow leave the conversation wondering whether I had the right to be concerned at all. There were boundaries I tried to set that became debates. There were moments when what I remembered happening was questioned or reframed. And when that happens often enough, you begin checking your experience against someone else's reaction. You stop asking, what do I think? And you start asking, am I allowed to think this? You stop asking, how do I feel? And start asking, is this feeling reasonable? You stop asking, what do I need? And start asking, will this need inconvenience someone? That's a very quiet way to lose your relationship with yourself. One of the things that therapy has been helping me practice is not immediately overwriting my own experience. Noticing before explaining, feeling before defending, listening before dismissing. And sometimes it's really simple. I'm tired. I don't like this. I don't want to do that. Something feels off. I need more time. I need help. Those statements don't automatically tell me what to do next. That's important. A feeling isn't always a verdict. Discomfort doesn't always mean danger. Someone disagreeing with me doesn't automatically mean they're unsafe. Self-trust still requires discernment. It still leaves room for reflection, for feedback, for changing my mind. But there's a difference between reflection and automatically putting yourself on trial. I'm trying to stop doing the second one. I'm also realizing that boundaries begin much earlier than the moment we communicate them to another person. A boundary starts internally. Before I can say, I don't have the capacity for that, I have to believe myself when I notice that I'm exhausted. Before I say, that doesn't work for me, I have to believe myself when something doesn't feel right. Before I can ask for help, I have to believe that needing help isn't evidence that I've failed. And before I can expect someone else to respond to my needs, I have to stop automatically negotiating myself out of having them. That's the work I'm doing now. Not becoming someone who never doubts herself. Not becoming someone who never needs reassurance. Not becoming someone who always knows exactly what to do. Just becoming someone who doesn't disappear the moment uncertainty arrives. Someone who can say, I might not know what this means yet, but I'm listening. So today, I want to leave you with a question. Where in your life are you waiting for something to become unbearable before you give yourself permission to respond? Maybe it's your body. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe it's a relationship that hasn't felt right for a long time. Maybe you're unhappy in a situation you've convinced yourself isn't bad enough to change. Maybe you need help, but there's a part of you that is still waiting until you absolutely cannot do it alone. What would happen if you didn't have to reach a crisis before you believed yourself? You don't have to know exactly what's wrong. You don't have to know what you're going to do about it. You don't have to make a dramatic decision today. But maybe self-trust begins somewhere much smaller, with the willingness to say, something doesn't feel right, and that's enough for me to pay attention. Thank you for spending this time with me. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to continue the journey with me. You can subscribe to Healing Conversations wherever you're listening, or join me on Substack, where I share reflections, journal prompts, and conversations that go a little deeper than what we can fit into each episode. And if today's conversation stirred something in you, I've created a free guide called the Self-Trust Reset. It's a gentle 7-day practice designed to help you reconnect with your own voice and begin rebuilding trust in yourself, one small step at a time. You can find the link in the show notes. If you know someone who might need this conversation, I hope you'll share it with them. Sometimes the conversation that changes someone's life begins because someone they trust simply thought of them. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep coming home to yourself. I'm Keisha, and this is Healing Conversations. I'll see you next time.